I'm 35 years old now. I live in a 2-bedroom condo in a quiet part of the city, overlooking a river that catches the sunset like fire on glass. I work in software, though that description feels too small for what I actually do. I own my own company. I employ people. I've been lucky, persistent, stubborn, whatever word you want to use, but I built something that works, and it more than pays the bills. I don't say that to brag. I say it because it's important context. Because the person I am today would look unrecognizable to the boy I used to be. If you'd met me at 10, 12, 14, you would have seen a kid with hunched shoulders, always waiting for the next blow, the next reminder that I wasn't a gift to my parents, but an invoice. My parents weren't the type to scream constantly, or throw things, or even look wild-eyed abusive from the outside. They were quieter than that. Calculating. Their chosen method of breaking me wasn't in fists but in numbers. They told me, over and over, that I owed them. For food. For clothes. For the roof over my head. For every pencil I used, every bite I ate, every doctor's visit. You know how much that dentist cost? My dad would mutter at dinner, stabbing his fork into overcooked meatloaf. $2.20. That's not pocket change. You better remember that when it's your turn to pay us back. You'll never really understand how much you cost us. My mom liked to say while folding laundry, sighing dramatically as if my socks had personally bankrupted her. But one day you will. One day, you'll realize children don't come free. I remember being 7 years old and lying awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to imagine what number was floating above me. How much had I racked up by then? Was I already in debt I'd never pay off? Other kids talked about chores, about being grounded, about strict rules. I couldn't relate. My punishments weren't timeouts, they were lectures about financial obligation. My parents kept what I can only describe as a mental ledger. Sometimes literal, too. My dad had notebooks where he budgeted, but they always seemed to circle back to me. Food equals $X, clothes equals $Y. Miscellaneous, kid-related, equals $Z. One night, when I was about 9, I came into the kitchen for water and saw him writing. I glanced at the page and froze. There was my name, at the top of a column. Beneath it, groceries portion, $37. 50, shoes $24. 99, gas, school trips, $15. 00. He caught me looking and slammed the book shut. Nosy kids cost more, he said coldly. I apologized, though I didn't know what for. From that point forward I knew it wasn't in my head. There really was a tally. The cruelest part wasn't just the numbers, it was how they dangled affection as a conditional prize. If I got good grades, they'd soften for a day or two, smile, even praise me. But the praise always came wrapped in barbed wire. You did well on that math test, my mom said once, ruffling my hair. I felt a spark of pride until she added, maybe you'll finally make enough money to pay us back faster. It's hard to describe what that does to a child's brain. You start thinking of love not as something freely given, but as something rented. Borrowed. With interest. By the time I was a teenager, the phrase, "You owe us," was as common in my house as hello or good night. They wielded it like a hammer. You owe us for that jacket, do you know how much it cost? You owe us for keeping you in this house when we could have thrown you out. You owe us for not letting you starve. The funny thing is, we weren't even poor. We were lower middle class, sure, but there was always food, always electricity. My parents weren't drowning in debt themselves. But they wanted me to feel like I was. And I did. God, I did. At 14, I got my first part-time job bagging groceries. I should have felt proud, independent. Instead, my parents made sure it was just another shackle. Good, my dad said when I showed him my first paycheck. Now you can start paying us back. He wasn't joking. He took the check out of my hand and deposited it into his own account. First installment, he said with a smirk. I remember feeling both furious and powerless, because I knew if I argued, he'd remind me of the ledger. Of all the invisible numbers floating around me. That became the rhythm of my teenage years. Work, school, guilt. Any job I got, part-time at a diner, mowing lawns, delivering papers, they skimmed off the top. Always with the same refrain. You owe us. This is fair. I can't count how many times I wanted to scream, "Isn't raising me your responsibility? Didn't you choose this? Isn't love supposed to mean something other than a receipt?" But the words always died in my throat. Because in my house, arguing was just proof I was ungrateful. Proof I owed even more. The weight of it pressed down every day. Walking into that house felt like walking into a bank where I was perpetually overdrawn. Every glance, every sigh, every word carried the same subtext: you're a debt. You're a burden. You are nothing more than what you cost us. I think the only reason I didn't completely break was because a small, secret part of me whispered, "One day, you'll get out. One day, you'll find a way to pay it all back, and then you'll never owe them another damn thing." I didn't know then what form that would take. But I clung to the thought like a lifeline. I didn't have a eureka moment so much as a build-up, like a kettle that finally stops pretending it isn't boiling. The final nudge came on a humid evening the summer I turned 18. I'd worked a double at the diner, came home smelling like fryer oil and coffee grounds, and found my dad at the kitchen table with his ledger open like a priest with a holy book. "Let's settle the week," he said, not looking up. "I need to shower," I muttered. He clicked his pen. "You need to learn priorities. Pay first. Then you can wash." I handed him my crumpled pay stub with the tenderness of someone offering up a bandaged finger. He studied it, nodded like a landlord counting rent, and tore the stub cleanly down the middle. He kept both halves. "Easier this way," he said. "So we both remember." My mom crossed her arms by the sink, chewing her lip. "This attitude of yours," she sighed. "We don't want to fight you. We just want what's fair." That word again, fair, so overused it had lost all shape. I stared at the laminated table edge where my forearm had carved an arc over the years doing homework. The surface had a faint burn mark where a pan had once kissed it. I still remember thinking, I'm a burn mark they want rent from. That night, in my room, I pulled the envelope from inside my mattress where I kept the tips they didn't know about. Not much. Mostly singles that carried the ghostly perfume of customers. I counted them slowly, twice, whispering the numbers like a prayer. I had a folded, printed bus schedule, a list of rooms for rent torn from the corkboard at the laundromat, and a pencil I sharpened with a knife because we never had a sharpener that lasted. I made a plan small enough to keep my hands from shaking. I left before dawn 2 days later. I packed a duffel, 2 pairs of jeans, 3 shirts, socks, my beat-up sneakers, a thrift store winter coat even though it was July. I wrote a note I edited down to 3 sentences so I wouldn't start apologizing. "I'm moving out. I appreciate what you've done. I will not be sending money." I put it beneath the salt shaker on the kitchen counter, because in my house the salt was the one thing that never moved. The bus hissed like a tired animal when I climbed on. I took the seat over the left rear wheel because it vibrated enough to numb my feet. The city I'd memorized through car windows looked different through scratched glass and unnoticed eyes. The laundromat at the corner, the bakery that opened at 5 a.m., the light that always stuck on yellow at Maple and 3rd. I kept my duffel close and watched everything recede. The room I found was 15 minutes from the diner by foot when I walked fast and 25 when I walked like a person. It was in a split-level house owned by a woman named Ruth who collected ceramic lighthouses. My room had a door that didn't quite latch and a single window with a view of a fence and a stubborn patch of ivy. The carpet was the color of old oatmeal and, when I moved the bed, a Lego rolled out from the dust like it had been waiting. There was a lock, but it was the kind you could open with a coin. I paid cash for the first month and gave Ruth an extra 20 to keep my mail by the toaster so it didn't disappear. The first morning in that room, I woke up terrified I'd made a mistake. My phone had 14 texts from my mom. The first few. "Where are you?" Then, "This isn't funny." Then, "Your father is very upset." Then, "We are contacting the police." The last one. "You're proving we were right. You're ungrateful. You'll come crawling back and we will make a list." I typed, deleted. I finally wrote, "I'm safe. I'm working. Please don't contact me at work." I almost added, "I love you," out of habit, then realized it was a currency they'd already inflated. I sent nothing more. The diner became the anchor point around which I built a life. I took the graveyard shift because the college kids wanted evenings and the older servers wanted mornings. Midnight to 8. Coffee refills for truckers with heavy eyelids, pancakes for exhausted nurses, eggs for night shift janitors who spoke softly to their hands. The fluorescent lights hummed a single persistent note. The fryer snapped and spit like it had opinions. The manager, a woman named Sonia with a braid that grazed her belt, ran the place like a ship. Be a wall, she told me on my first overnight, tapping my chest with her order pad. People crash into you all night. You don't move. You don't break. You just stand. It was the closest thing to advice I'd ever been offered that didn't also involve an invoice. I learned to pour coffee without looking, to stack plates so the weight distributed over my palms like an apology, to fold the receipt into a tiny tent and place it upside down for privacy. Tips were inconsistent and often paid in coins that clinked like something blunt dropping into water. I saved all of them. I rolled quarters at 2 in the morning in my little room while the ivy shook in the wind like it wanted in. School was next. Community college, because it was cheap and nobody asked many questions. I went to the registrar with a stack of forms and a pen that kept skipping. Part-time, I said. Nights? And she nodded without looking like I'd recited a line hundreds had said before me. I signed up for Intro to Accounting because numbers had been used against me and I wanted to make them sit in rows and behave. I registered for a computer basics class because a kid at the diner said, "You can learn that stuff free online, but the piece of paper helps." It was a stupidly brutal schedule. Diner 12 a.m. to 8 a.m., nap from 9 to noon when the lawn guys weren't mowing. Class 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. Back to the room. Homework. Back to the diner. I ate a lot of toast because it was free if you smiled at the cook and pretended it fell on a plate by accident. I stole nothing, but I learned the grace of surplus. The texts from my parents kept coming. Some were long, full of elliptical threats. When you realize the world doesn't hand out charity, don't expect us to open our door. We're not an ATM. Some were short and surgically cold. Return the jacket we bought you. Sometimes my dad sent photos of the ledger, my name scrawled like a headline. See? He wrote once. You're already in arrears. I stopped replying. I changed my number. They called the diner a few times. Sonia told them, "He's not here," and then told me, "Get a new number. And get sturdy." I loved her a little for that. I learned to love small, dull victories. The first month I paid Ruth on time and she said, "Thank you, honey," and my stomach didn't flip. The first day in accounting where the professor wrote, "Good control," and I smiled alone at a bus stop. The first time I opened my bank app and the number didn't make my chest go tight. Small bricks. A wall. I still thought in receipts. I kept every syllabus, every bus ticket, every rent stub in a plastic folder with a cracked spine. Not because I planned anything yet, but because my brain trusted paper more than promises. I tracked everything in a spiral notebook I bought for 79 cents. On the cover I wrote, "Out." The first page said, "Deposit $1.26. Tip jar $14. 73. Rent $400. Bus pass $44. Laundry $8. I made little boxes and shaded them when bills were paid. I liked the way the pencil darkened the page. When I did allow myself to dream, it wasn't glamorous. It was silence. It was owning a lock with a key only I had. It was being the person who decided when to answer the phone. It was the absence of a ledger with my name at the top. The thing about living in scarcity is you become efficient by accident. I stopped bleeding energy on people who drained me. I learned which classes mattered and which were theater. I sat in the library during the last hour before my shift started and clicked through free tutorials on a bulky desktop with a mouse that needed its red light cleaned. HTML, then some Python, then a community forum where people asked questions and answered each other like nobody was keeping score. I felt a heat in my chest reading Strangers Help Strangers for nothing. It made me suspicious, then hopeful. It made me think there was a way to be in the world that wasn't a trade. One late winter night, after a rush of icy, blue-lipped customers, the diner went still. The only sound was the dishwasher churning like a tired heartbeat. Sonia wiped down the counter and said lightly, "You ever think about getting out of here?" "All the time," I said. "Good," she replied. "People who stop thinking that turn into furniture." I went home that morning as the sky turned the color of milk and felt, for the first time since I'd left, something like a decision forming in my bones. Not a plan. Not yet. But a direction. I lay on the oatmeal carpet and stared at the ceiling fan that clicked but refused to fall, and I thought, I am not an invoice. I am a person. And I can build something that isn't a ledger. The kettle had boiled. I could hear it now. And I wasn't afraid of the steam. The years between 19 and 24 feel like a blur when I look back, but living them was like walking barefoot on gravel. Every step hurt, and every step was progress. I didn't have a mentor. Nobody pulled me aside and said, "Here's the path." All I had were scraps, forum threads, used textbooks, free code tutorials posted by people who seemed impossibly generous. And stubbornness. God, I had so much stubbornness, though back then it looked more like anger I didn't know where to put. I worked the diner until my knuckles cracked from washing dishes and the smell of grease clung to my hair no matter how hard I scrubbed. But little by little, I found side hustles. Fixing computers for neighbors. Designing basic websites for local shops. Once, I spent 3 weeks cobbling together an online order form for a florist who paid me in crumpled bills that smelled like lilies and cigarette smoke. I said yes to everything that wasn't illegal. Sometimes it paid pennies. Sometimes it didn't pay at all. But every task was another brick. Another piece of proof that I could build, not just survive. My parents didn't disappear right away. They switched tactics. Instead of direct threats, they tried the guilt net. At 20, I got a letter. Handwritten, in my mom's careful script. "Son, we don't want to fight anymore. Families forgive. We still love you, but you have to understand what you cost us. We are keeping track, but we would rather you come home and discuss how you can help. We only want fairness. You'll see, one day you'll thank us for teaching you responsibility." I read it 3 times, each word like a stone in my throat. I almost wavered. I almost called. Then I remembered the ledger. The column with my name. My dad tearing up my paycheck stub like it was his property. I folded the letter, slid it into a plastic sleeve, and tucked it in the back of my growing folder labeled "Out." Not because I wanted the words, but because I knew one day I'd need the reminder of how they operated. After that, I stopped checking my old mailbox. Ruth held the letters for a while, then shrugged when I told her she could toss them. "Family's family until they aren't," she said. "Don't let them drag you under, honey." By 21, I transferred from community college to a state university. Still part-time, still working. It took me 6 years to finish what most people did in 4. I carried a backpack patched with duct tape and bought used editions of every textbook, sometimes 2 editions behind, piecing together the missing parts from the library. The more I studied computers, the more I realized I wasn't just good at it, I craved it. Numbers had always been my enemy, but code felt different. Code wasn't a ledger written against me, it was something I could shape. It bent if I bent with it. And when it worked, it sang back clean and precise. During a late-night library session, I stumbled onto a post about freelance software projects. Companies posting contracts online, offering real money for real solutions. I bid on one, trembling, with a portfolio that was basically duct tape and floral websites. Somehow they said yes. I pulled 3 all-nighters, drinking gas station coffee, and delivered. They paid me $300. To me, it felt like winning the lottery. That $300 didn't just pay my rent. It rewired my brain. I realized the diner wasn't forever. It was a bridge. My life could pivot. I could be more than a plate carrier and a tip jar. The next 2 years were a grind like no other. Diner at night. Classes in the afternoon. Freelance projects whenever my eyes stayed open. I lived in cycles of exhaustion and adrenaline. Sometimes I'd wake up at my desk with code burned into my retinas like an afterimage. But slowly, surely, the diner's shifts grew fewer, the contracts grew bigger. At 24, I quit the diner. Sonia hugged me so hard my ribs popped and said, "Don't you dare turn into furniture, kid." She gave me a $20 bill folded into a tiny square. On it, she'd written, "Invest in yourself." I still have it, pressed flat in a notebook. My freelance work became steady enough to rent a better apartment. 1 bedroom, real deadbolts, no ivy clawing at the window. I bought a cheap couch off Craigslist, a desk from a yard sale, and a mattress I carried up 3 flights of stairs by myself. I remember collapsing onto it, staring at the ceiling, and thinking, this is mine. No ledger, no tally. Just mine. The money wasn't glamorous yet, but it was mine. Every deposit, every invoice, every check I wrote felt like peeling another layer of guilt off my skin. Meanwhile, my parents' silence stretched. They stopped writing after I moved, probably because they didn't have my address. I knew they'd never really let go, but for a few years it was like living in a pocket of quiet air. At 26, I landed my first full-time job with a small software company. The interview felt surreal. They asked me what I could do, not what I owed. They offered benefits, even a retirement plan. I nodded calmly, but inside I was screaming, I made it out. I actually made it out. My parents didn't know. They couldn't. I never gave them my number or email. I learned to live with the occasional paranoia that they'd show up one day, ledger in hand, ready to remind me I was still in debt. But they didn't. And the longer they didn't, the more space I had to become someone else. At 29, I started my own company. Small at first, just me and 2 other freelancers I'd met online. We worked out of coffee shops, passed laptops across sticky tables, laughed at bugs that kept us awake at night. Somehow it grew. Clients brought other clients. Word of mouth spread. Within a year, I had a team of 8. Then 12. Then more. By 31, I was making more than I'd ever dreamed. Not billionaire money, not private jet money, but enough that rent, groceries, health insurance, all the things that once felt like life or death calculations, became simple. I bought the condo with the river view. I furnished it without guilt. I paid salaries to people who trusted me. And every morning, I woke up without the weight of an invisible ledger hanging over my head. Except, it wasn't gone. Not really. Because deep down, I could still hear their voices. You owe us. Don't forget. Children don't come free. I knew, sooner or later, I'd have to deal with that echo. The first step came one random Tuesday night. I was cleaning out old boxes, sorting through papers I hadn't touched in years. At the bottom of one folder, I found the plastic sleeve with my mom's letter. And behind it, I found the spiral notebook where, at 19, I'd written every expense, every bus ticket, every dime I'd scraped together. I ran my hand over the cover where I'd written, out. That word hit me like a challenge. Out. I wasn't just out. I'd won. I was free. But they had never let me feel it, not fully. And in that moment, sitting on my condo floor with the city lights dripping in through the window, I knew exactly what I had to do. If they wanted the ledger, then I would give them the ledger. Not a metaphorical one. Not an argument. The real thing. Down to the cent. And once I did, I would never, ever, speak to them again. The plan started with a spreadsheet and silence. I'd work late, the condo soft with that almost sound you get when the river outside is behaving. I made tea I barely drank, opened my laptop, and created a blank sheet titled, Ledger, Final. Petty? Maybe. But the name steadied my hand. If they wanted a number, I would make them choke on the precision. First, categories. I thought like a bookkeeper and like a kid who'd watched the tally grow against him. Housing, share of mortgage/rent, property tax, insurance. Utilities, electric, water, gas, trash. Food, grocery share, no restaurants. Clothing, non-gift basics only. School, fees, supplies, field trips, sports. Healthcare, premiums portion, copays, dental, glasses. Transport, gas to get me to school, bus passes. Miscellaneous, haircuts, toiletries, birthday party costs for me, not theirs. I added a column for age, another for source, another for whether it was documented or estimated, and a fat column at the end labeled adjusted dollar, today. I decided I would be generous in their favor where anything was fuzzy. If the point was closure, I didn't want to leave room for haggling. I started with the paper trail I actually had. When I'd left at 18, I'd taken almost nothing, but years later, during a quick, awkward visit to drop off a form for a distant aunt, I'd seen a banker's box labeled Taxes 19x times minus 20 times x in their garage. I asked to borrow a few folders for a class project and never returned them. They forgot, I didn't. I'd kept the folders buried in a closet like a live wire. Now I cut the string and spilled them across my kitchen island. There they were, copies of 1040s with dependent boxes checked, W-2s, property tax statements, mortgage interest summaries, a handful of EOBs from insurance, 2 dentist invoices, a receipt for my first pair of glasses, a check carbon for band fee, a church youth retreat permission slip with a handwritten PD $35, and a worn envelope full of school picture orders with the smallest package circled. Proof. Ghosts on paper. Housing was the ugliest category. Economists do equivalent scales to apportion household costs. I wasn't going to pretend I had a PhD, but I could be consistent. Ages 0 to 10, I allocated 25% of housing to me. Ages 11, 18, 33%, because I ate like a small tornado and took up more space. I cross-referenced their mortgage interest statements and property tax bills year by year, added homeowners insurance from a policy renewal notice, and estimated principal using amortization tables I found in an old finance textbook. Where I had no numbers, I used the lowest plausible ones. I forced myself to be bored enough to be fair. Utilities were easier. There were 10 electric bills clipped together with a rusty paper clip, Januaries across a decade, like my dad had once tried to compare winters. I averaged, halved for seasonal variation, then took a small share. Water and trash I guessed from county schedules. Gas I gleaned from a single budget note in my dad's handwriting. Gas $68. I documented each assumption in a notes column like I was preparing for a hostile audit. In a way, I was. Food made me pause. My mother's voice tried to push through. We fed you. I closed my eyes, opened them, and typed. USDA publishes cost of food plans. I downloaded archived PDFs, used a thrifty plan for a boy my age for each year, scaled it down because we ate a lot of cheap starch, then scaled back up because we weren't starving. I took the average and selected the higher number if a range was offered. I didn't include a single restaurant meal, because those were their choice, not my request. I excluded holiday spreads and anything bought for guests. I included the sacks of potatoes and generic cereal that had kept me full and humiliated. Clothing. I inventoried what I could remember and what I could prove. 2 Payless receipts, $1.24. $99 and $19. $99, tucked behind a manual for a VCR. A tax return note. Back to school clothes $150. That my dad had annotated with a proud underline. I compared to Bureau of Labor Statistics tables for average clothing spend per child and then cut by a conservative third. I added winter coat, $40, jeans, 2 pairs a year, underwear and socks at the cheapest multipack rate. I excluded the jacket they demanded back by text at 19. I'd returned it and still remember watching my dad hang it in the hall closet like a trophy. School, this was where the little cuts bled. Field trip slips, $8 for the planetarium, $12 for the museum, $5 for the bus. Band fee $35. I added $7 a month for a used clarinet rental across a year because I remember the rental tag and the smell of disinfectant. No private lessons. Supplies. I built a list from a public school's published supply list for my grade levels, spiral notebooks, pencils, a binder the year Mrs. Klein insisted. I priced them using historical circulars I found scanned online in a rabbit hole of couponing forums. I included the $60 senior yearbook because my mom had circled the smallest package for school pictures every single year but couldn't resist the yearbook ad space where she'd written, "So proud of you!" next to a photo that didn't look like me. Healthcare. 2 dental invoices totaled $220 and $180, a filling and a deep cleaning that had hurt more than I let on. An EOB showed a well-child visit copay of $20. I know there were more visits. I also know we didn't go unless we had to. I took the insurance premium total, found on a W-2 box for cafeteria plan, medical, estimated 10% as attributable to my presence as a dependent, and added copays at the most conservative schedule, 1 physical a year, 2 sick visits. Glasses, $120 for frames, $60 for lenses, $20 for the optometrist, plus 1 replacement when I sat on them at 13 and my dad said, "Add it to your tab." I did. Transport. They didn't buy me a car. I counted mileage for school drop-offs, the years I wasn't on the bus route based on Google Maps, and the number of days in a school year, multiplied by the IRS standard mileage rate for those years, cut in half because it was piggybacked on their commute sometimes. Later, when I took the city bus, I added monthly pass costs pulled from a transit authority archive. I did not include gas for family outings, trips to church, vacations to Aunt Linda's. I excluded all vacations entirely, whether I wanted to or not. Miscellaneous, haircuts. I found a punch card from Clip and Go, with 4 punches. I multiplied by 3 cards a year through age 12, then assumed less frequent cuts when I decided Shaggy was a shield. Toiletries, toothpaste, deodorant once I needed it, the embarrassment surcharge when my mom sighed loudly in the aisle. I priced the generic brand. Everything had a date. Everything had a source. Where a number wasn't perfect, I left a breadcrumb trail. Then, because numbers a decade old mean less than they look, I adjusted to today's dollars using CPIU tables I'd pulled from the Bureau of Labor Statistics archive. Each line item got a little formula, equals original asterisk, CPI_today/CPI_year. I watched small amounts climb to modest ones with the dispassionate patience of math. By the time the sheets spanned childhood to 18, my eyes were swimming. I took a break, stood at the window, and watched a barge nose upriver like a slow idea. My phone buzzed with a Slack message from one of my engineers in a different time zone. I muted it and went back to the past. 2 more columns. Credits to me. If fairness was the word my parents loved, I would make it bilateral. I listed every paycheck they had taken from me outright. I didn't have stubs. My dad had torn them, but the diner had issued W-2s, and the Social Security earnings statement fills in gaps. I pulled mine. I entered each year's earnings as a teen and applied the portion I remembered handing over. When I couldn't be certain, I credited them the benefit of doubt, and only claimed 50%. I added cash tips I'd hidden under the mattress and later used for my own bus passes as a negative, my expense. I subtracted gifts earmarked for me by others, Grandma's $100 at Christmas the year she wrote, "Don't let them take this," which they did, so I counted it as mine, then as theirs, netting to 0 in my favor. I included the child tax credit and the dependent exemption savings they claimed, as best as I could estimate from tax tables for those years. I routed those as a credit against my debt, because if we were accounting, we were accounting. Exclusions. I made a list with a thicker border: vacations, family furniture, appliances, holiday decorations, upgrades to the car, the big screen TV my dad bought on a whim. I added a note. Not benefits specific to me, household consumption choices. It took 3 nights. I slept with numbers in my mouth like pennies. On the 4th night, I cleaned the formulas, hid the helper columns, and stared at the total. It blinked back, indecently ordinary, $94,362. 17. It wasn't the 6-figure monster I braced for, but it wasn't small. It was, to my eyes, generous. If anything, it repaid them for being the adults, for doing their legal duty and the bare minimum of love. It also, neatly, exceeded the total of the wages they'd taken and the credits they'd claimed by a wide margin. I rounded nothing. I would pay the exact cent numbers had been used as a weapon against me. Accuracy would be my shield. I printed the spreadsheet, slipped it into a new, clean folder, and wrote on the tab, "Debt Final." I wasn't going to mail it. I wasn't going to invite debate. This was for me. But I wanted the physicality of it, the weight in my hands. I still needed one thing: their banking info. I refused to call. I went hunting through the folders again and struck gold in a stupid place. An old "for deposit only" stamp with my mother's cursive and their account number, the one they'd used when they deposited my checks for safekeeping. I compared the number to a photocopy of a voided check in the tax folder. It matched. I logged into my bank, added a new payee, entered the routing and account, and set up a $0.01 transfer as a test because fraud is real and I didn't want to mess up the one part of this that had to be flawless. The next morning, the penny left my account. An hour later, their bank returned it. Account open, unable to accept outside deposits. I cursed, then thought like a systems person. I called my bank's business line, explained I needed to send a wire to a personal account with a deposit block. The rep said, We can initiate a Fed wire as long as you have the ABA and account. I did. Note field is limited, she added. 22 characters. 22 characters. Just enough. I thanked her, hung up, and opened a blank document. I typed the only words I wanted to say, in all caps, all weight contained, debt repaid. I copied it out once by hand on a sticky note, and put it on my laptop bezel so I'd see it when I opened the wire form. Then I opened my phone's settings, scrolled to blocked contacts, and added the numbers I'd memorized as a child. I created mail rules to auto-delete any message from their addresses. I logged into social accounts and flipped every privacy switch. I wasn't doing this to provoke. I was doing it to end something. That night, I stood in the dark kitchen, the river moving like a sleeping animal, and held the folder against my chest. I thought about 7-year-old me staring at a ceiling and trying to imagine the number floating there. I thought about the ledger closing like a mouth. Tomorrow, I would send it. Tomorrow, I would be done. The morning I wired the money, the sky was a flat, undecided gray. I woke before my alarm, sat on the edge of the bed, and listened to the radiator tick like a clock that wasn't mine. My laptop waited on the desk, the sticky note still stuck to the bezel, debt repaid. I made coffee I barely tasted, logged into my bank's business portal, and opened the wire transfer page. The form was cold, mechanical, routing number, account number, amount, note field. It felt almost anticlimactic after weeks of arithmetic and 3 decades of echoes. In the amount box, I typed 94362. 17. In note I typed, debt repaid. 22 characters, no more, no less. The screen asked, confirm? I stared at it long enough that the cursor blinked at me like an impatient parent. My heart wasn't racing. That surprised me. It wasn't rage, it wasn't fear. It was something cleaner, steadier, like setting down a heavy box after carrying it too far. I clicked submit. The screen refreshed, wire transfer scheduled. Estimated delivery, same business day. That was it. No lightning. No catharsis trumpet. Just a line on a screen, the way my entire childhood had been lines in a ledger. I closed the laptop, pulled the sticky note free, folded it into quarters, and slid it into the folder with the printed spreadsheet. A private artifact, nothing more. The waiting wasn't long. By noon, I refreshed my account and saw the number decrease, clean as a guillotine. $94,362.17 gone. A sum that had once seemed insurmountable, untouchable, now a subtraction I could afford. I imagined them seeing it. My dad, logging into his account the way he used to flip open the ledger, eyes narrowing as the balance jumped. My mom maybe getting a text alert, her mouth forming a small "oh." I wondered if they would call each other into the kitchen the way they had when bills came, my mom clutching the envelope, my dad sharpening his pen. Did they smile? Did they nod like accountants closing books? Did they wonder if it was a mistake? Did they think I'd crawled back after all? I didn't care. The wire carried my only words. The block list carried the rest. That evening, my phone buzzed 3 times in quick succession. Unknown number. Then another, then another. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The rules I'd written were already eating the emails alive, shoving them into a digital furnace. I imagined their words dissolving before they reached me, the way I'd once imagined bills piling up on my bed. But I did get one voicemail before the block list caught up. I didn't listen to it that night. I didn't need to. I poured a drink instead, sat by the river window, and watched the lights smear on the water. For the first time, I realized my chest didn't feel tight. Breathing didn't feel like work. I slept without dreams. The next morning, curiosity got me. I opened the voicemail transcription service my phone provider offered and let the words scroll across the screen instead of hearing their voices. It was my dad. Of course it was. So this is what you think, huh? You think you can just pay us off and disappear? You think this settles it? You think this number means anything compared to what we gave you? You're a coward. A real man would show up and face us. A real man would admit he owes more than money. You owe us respect. You owe us your presence. You owe us everything. Don't think this makes you free. Don't think we're done. The transcription stumbled on some words. Maybe he'd shouted, maybe the line had cracked, but the meaning was clear. I closed the app. Deleted it. Blocked the new number. For a moment, the old panic threatened to crawl back in. You owe us, but then I laughed. Out loud. Alone, at my kitchen counter. Because I had given them exactly what they asked for. Nothing less. Nothing more. They wanted a transaction? They got one. They wanted numbers? They got them. They wanted fair? They got a calculation so fair it bent over backward in their favor. And I was done. Ledger closed. The weeks after the transfer felt strange, like walking on a leg that had been broken too long. I kept expecting the old weight to return, the invisible debt to whisper at my ear. But when I logged into my bank account, there was no dread. When I checked my mail, there was no guilt. When I walked through my condo, I didn't hear their voices hanging off the furniture. My employees didn't know, of course. To them, I was just their boss, the guy who made corny jokes in Zoom calls and pushed them for deadlines. But I found myself showing up lighter, calmer, less sharp-edged. I caught myself humming once while reviewing code, and it startled me so much I laughed. I had carried the ledger for so long I hadn't realized how much space it took up. Now it was gone. About a month later, I ran into an old neighbor in the grocery store. Mrs. Patterson, hair still teased high, cart full of coupons and familiarity. She looked at me like she was seeing a ghost. "Lord, you've done well for yourself," she said, glancing at my watch, my clothes. Then, lower, "Your parents are still talking about you, you know." I felt the old reflex twitch in my stomach, but it passed quickly. "I'm sure they are," I said, and left it at that. She leaned in. "They said you settled your debt." I smiled. "That's one way to put it." I walked away before she could ask more. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to explain. That night, I sat again by the river window, the city humming low behind me, and thought about freedom. Not the cinematic kind with fireworks and champagne, but the quieter kind that slips in like air through a cracked window. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. Anger had gotten me through the diner's shifts, the classes, the long nights with code. Anger had pushed me to prove I could survive. But now, anger felt unnecessary. What I felt was clean. Like a page without writing. Love isn't a transaction. Parenting isn't a ledger. But if someone insists it is, if someone makes your childhood into a bill, you can still pay it off. You can balance it, not because you owe it, but because closure is sometimes a receipt. And when you hand that receipt back, you don't ever have to look at the ledger again. The wire transfer settled something I didn't even realize was still vibrating inside me. For weeks after, I felt a strange stillness in my body, like when a fan you've gotten used to finally shuts off and you hear silence again. It wasn't a dramatic kind of freedom. No confetti, no marching band. Just small, almost invisible shifts. I'd wake up in the morning and not feel the old knot in my chest. I'd walk into my office and realize I hadn't spent the commute rehearsing imaginary arguments with my parents. I'd open my fridge and not hear my mother sigh about the price of milk. I hadn't noticed how much space they took up in my head until they weren't there anymore. Of course, they tried to force their way back in. 3 days after the transfer, another voicemail slipped through before my filters caught it. This time it was my mother. The transcription read like a script she'd probably practiced in the mirror. "I just don't understand you. After all we sacrificed, after all we did, you throw money at us like we're strangers. Do you think this makes us proud? Do you think this makes us happy? You owe us your love, your gratitude, your presence. Not just a number. Families don't work like this. You will regret this. We are your parents. You can't erase that." I read it once, deleted it, blocked the new number, and went back to my sandwich. It felt almost anticlimactic, how little weight their words carried now. For so long, they had been the heaviest thing in my life. Now they were background noise. 2 weeks later, I got a text from an unknown number with a local area code. Just one sentence. "Money doesn't buy forgiveness." I smiled. They were right. I hadn't bought forgiveness. I hadn't even tried. Forgiveness wasn't the point. Forgiveness is a gift you give to someone who's sorry. They weren't sorry. And I didn't owe them forgiveness. What I'd bought was silence. And that, to me, was priceless. I blocked that number too. Months rolled on. My company grew, slowly but steadily. We picked up a contract with a mid-sized firm that opened doors to bigger clients. I hired another developer, then a project manager who was better at spreadsheets than I'd ever be. The office culture settled into something I was quietly proud of, supportive, no ledgers, no debts, just collaboration. Sometimes I'd catch myself noticing the contrast. When one of my employees made a mistake, I didn't sigh or tell them they owed me. I said, "Okay, let's fix it." And every time, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. I was building the opposite of what I came from. I started therapy too. I figured if I'd invested so much in everything else, education, housing, business, why not invest in my mind? The therapist asked me once what I thought closure meant. I told her, "Closure is giving them exactly what they demanded, and nothing else. It's slamming the ledger shut." She tilted her head. "And what comes after that?" That was harder. Because after you close the book, there's just blank paper. Silence. But I was learning to write on it. About 6 months after the transfer, I bumped into an old high school acquaintance at a coffee shop. He'd stayed local, worked construction, had a couple of kids. We swapped surface-level updates, then he lowered his voice and said, "Hey, your folks still talk about you sometimes." I braced myself. "They said you squared things. Like paid them back or something." He chuckled. "Weird way to talk about family, huh?" I nodded. "Weird way, yeah?" I didn't explain. I didn't owe him an explanation. I'd spent my whole life explaining, justifying, defending. Now silence was its own explanation. Sometimes I wondered what my parents did with the money. 94,000 isn't life-changing wealth, but it isn't nothing either. Did they pay off their mortgage? Buy a car? Spend it on vacations? Did they hoard it as proof they'd been right all along? I'll never know. And the surprising thing was, I didn't want to know. Curiosity flickered, but it didn't consume me. That was the real shift. For once, their choices had no power over me. The real test came about a year later, when my aunt, the one I'd once dropped paperwork off for, passed away. I debated whether to attend the funeral. Not for her. I barely knew her, but because I knew my parents would be there. In the end, I didn't go. Not because I was afraid, but because I didn't need to prove anything anymore. Showing up, facing them, that would have been their script. Not mine. I honored my aunt quietly, in my own way, and let the day pass without confrontation. That choice felt like freedom. One evening, sitting in my condo with the river reflecting city lights, I pulled out the folder one last time. The spreadsheet. The sticky note. The letter from my mom I'd saved at 19. I read through them slowly, the way you read through old homework before tossing it. Then I fed them, one by one, into my shredder. The sound was steady, mechanical, final. Strips of paper curling into a bin. The ledger was gone, in every sense. When I emptied the shredder into the trash, I felt lighter than I ever had. People sometimes say success is the best revenge. I don't agree. Success is for me. Revenge, in my case, was math. Cold, clean math. Numbers they'd used to chain me turned back into a key. And once I turned it, the door shut behind me forever. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, of possibility, of peace, of a future I could actually claim as mine. For the first time, I wasn't running from debt. I wasn't carrying a ledger. I was just living. And that, I realized, was the sweetest revenge of all. It's been a few years since I pressed submit on that wire transfer, and I can say this with a calmness I never thought possible. I don't owe them anything. Not anymore. Not in money, not in time, not in explanation. For most of my life, I thought freedom would feel like fireworks. Like running through an open field with my arms outstretched, shouting into the sky. I imagined it as a dramatic escape scene in a movie, headlights flashing, tires on gravel, the hero finally outrunning the villains. But real freedom feels different. It feels quieter. Softer. It's the silence of my phone not buzzing with guilt-laden messages. It's the stillness of my apartment at night, knowing every piece of furniture is mine, paid for with my labor, not something hanging over me like a receipt. It's the peace of opening my bank app and seeing numbers that belong to me, and me alone. The biggest shift isn't material, though. It's mental. I don't walk around rehearsing arguments anymore. I don't carry the phantom weight of debt that never really existed. I don't hear their voices narrating my every expense, every mistake, every success. I hear my own voice now. Sometimes people ask about my parents. They assume I must still talk to them. "Oh, you must be so close now that you're successful," they'll say. Or, "Bet they're proud of you." I smile politely and change the subject. I don't owe strangers the truth, either. But if I were to answer honestly, I'd say this: no, they're not proud of me. They never were. Pride requires love, and love can't survive when it's measured in dollars and cents. They didn't raise me to be loved. They raised me to be an investment. A balance sheet. A return they could one day collect. And I paid them back. To the cent. That's the part one keep to myself, though. Because most people wouldn't understand. They'd tell me I didn't owe them in the first place. They'd say I should have just cut contact and moved on. And maybe they're right. But for me, the act of settling the ledger wasn't about them, it was about me. About taking back the arithmetic of my life. About closing a book that had been open too long. There's something powerful about giving someone exactly what they demanded, nothing more, nothing less. My parents wanted a transaction. Fine. I gave them one. But they don't get the parts of me they never asked for. My presence, my love, my time. Those things aren't for sale. When I think back to my childhood, what stands out most aren't the specific numbers but the feeling they created, the sense that I was a debt, a burden, a mistake being tallied. That feeling used to define me. Now it doesn't. Now, when I think of myself, I think of the man who built something out of scraps. The boy who walked away with a duffel bag and turned diner shifts into degrees, degrees into jobs, jobs into a company. The man who shredded the ledger and kept the peace. I think of the river outside my window, the way it catches the sunset in shards of gold, and I realize, I'm not a debt. I'm not an invoice. I'm not a burden. I'm free. Do I ever feel sad about it? Sometimes. Not for me, for them. Sad that they never understood what love could have been if they hadn't made it transactional. Sad that they'll never know the man I became, not really. Sad that their story ends with a wire transfer and a block list. But sadness isn't the same as regret. I don't regret it. Not 1 cent. I gave them what they asked for. And then I walked away. Therapy has helped me see it in layers. My therapist once asked me, "If you could go back and tell your younger self one thing, what would it be?" I thought for a long time. Then I said, "I'd tell him he's not a ledger line. He's not a burden. And one day, he'll prove it." Because that's the truth I carry now. I don't carry debt. I carry proof. Proof that I was more than what they told me. Proof that I could rewrite the story. Proof that sometimes revenge isn't about anger or destruction, it's about finality. I don't think of them much anymore. Occasionally, when I see a child in a store, tugging at their parent's hand while the parent sighs about prices, I'll feel a flicker of memory. But then I watch other parents laugh, ruffle their kids' hair, buy the candy bar anyway, and I remind myself, not every child is raised as a bill. Some kids get love. I didn't. But I made my own life anyway. To anyone who's grown up under that same weight, who's been told again and again that you owe for existing, I'll say this: you don't. You never did. But if you want closure, if you want to flip the script, there are ways. For me, it was math. For you, it might be silence. Or distance. Or success. Whatever it is, don't let them convince you that you're a ledger. You're not. You never were. The last time I stood over the shredder, feeding it the remnants of my past, I thought of my dad's voice saying, "You'll never really understand how much you cost us." He was wrong. I understand exactly what I cost. I calculated it down to the cent. I paid it. And then I walked away. What he'll never understand is this: love doesn't come with receipts. And the moment you stop letting other people treat you like a debt to be collected, that's the moment you're truly free. So that's my story. 35 years old, self-made, debt-free in every sense. I don't carry a ledger anymore. I carry silence, peace, and possibility. And if my parents ever check their account balance and see the ghost of that wire transfer, maybe they'll feel like they won. But the truth is, I did. Because the greatest closure I ever found was this. Sometimes the best revenge is giving people exactly what they demanded. And nothing more.